長尾チェンジだくびっくりした。これか。ごめん。こんな話もだ。逆にサムはね、司忍を弁護し始めたよ。逆にけど。あんたらサイバーやってるあったんじゃないか。もう言ってもないよ。あんたらやったんじゃないか。言っちまったよ、これがさ。お前らやったんじゃないかさ。言ってもないよ。さあ、奈良君のサイトはあの人やろ。自分たちがやったんじゃないかって言ったよ。さあなたサイトを話したんじゃないか。警察の一部にもいるんで大体魔法を信じてるからそんなもん信じるわけないやん。もう言ってもね水ビアの兵器の一部だそう兵器のな一つたるねそうなんて言ったさマーズとかサーズとかこれなのこれは言ったんこれは信じてるこれは言ったんや信じるか証拠を見せろって言った例えばドラえもんのび太の魔界大冒険みたいなそうなんか浮かばせるとか例えばこのおしぼりをこういう状態で浮かばせるとかそういうの見せてくれ北転校生ミスターマリックみたいなああいうユリゲラーさんみたいなああいうの見せてくれんの北転校さんこんなんしたいのさ機会でもあるからねただねびっくりしたよ来たアメリカにびっくりした本当になんか事情あったよなさやばい児玉一家か児玉の連中か左右合作児玉かやっぱり東京23区現に大阪のサイバーテロ事件あれびっくりした本当にびっくりした本当にまだ3極クーデターやってた3極クーデター逆に言うとねもうこのチャタムもいいんやけど逆にこれビルダーバーグのサイト見せたわよビルダーバーグのサイト見せたわよ逆に新しい制度 RS 名にねなんで強いかなと思ったのJ 佐々木理事長調べてる知ってるじゃんなんで強いかさ来てたからやっぱりなっちゃうそうなんで強いかなちなみになんか借金の通帳来た普通こういうのはねメールじゃなくて普通はね紙で来るわさただあれ俺さやったさ2016年の時に妨害起こったからねさ今来るかこんな時いやでねしてしまって本当にやっぱりとかやっぱり長浜が危なかったからさ危なかった来るかなと思った多分無理やと思うな多分邪魔したらあかんから逮捕されるか逆にさおいジェンさんどうでもいいじゃん脅迫に行かんのよ当たり前今日当たり前の本当に何のことだと思ったびっくりしたヒデさんなまさか生きてたびっくりした本当にやっぱブライブルみたいによし知ってましたよさこっそり 生き延びてたね。びっくりした本当に。なんかアゲノさんにそっくりやった。びっくりした。逆に言うとね、松本よかった。いや、あんな政治人がさ、やっぱりな、進出者じゃない、やっぱ介入し始めたと思う。やっぱ本時期分裂したから、やっぱりな。だからってこと。ってことなんだね。びっくりしたな、本当に最近出始めて。見てびっくりやっぱ講談社商品転売先。あれはびっくりした。俺架空でな、新山大津にやっちまったよ。やっちまったよ。ぶっ放してまったよ。やっちまったよ。総理参加のね、レンタルショップもうちょい避難させて。時短営業と休業要請書。これで避難させて。ちょっとあんまり知らせるとダメやったんだね。俺は7君でした。こっそり読んでましたさ。たまたま新山。たまたま講談社の件音楽聞いてやろうって言ったよ。こっそり閣議決定したよ。少数の閣議決定したよ。何前回一致じゃんけど少数やったよ。これでね戦うって言ったよ。タイテロ先生この代わり新山はね、もう知名度は3番目の首都にしようかって言った。東洋地域ね、結構だね。逆に言うとこの以下にな、松山が新山の区間ね、電車在来線特急区間沿線化できんかな思った。それじゃないと四国新幹線も作れんかったら長山の時、いや新山鍵やと思った。新山鍵やと思った。俺思ったね。新山びっくりな、2世紀別の在来線乗れてびっくりだな。よかった、住みやすい土地やった。公安施設あれびっくりした。7区あれびっくりした。やっぱ脅されたからね。脅されたからやっぱ思った看板、滋賀県と新潟のやっぱり栃木かもう井上前の出身は茨城でしょ。茨城やったやつ。安藤青山証明書、青田の証ね、もう知ってましたよ。しっかりして4年県で言ってたよ。4年じゃなくて水沢と福井じゃん。あれで無理だよ。福井じゃん。今までの身長150じゃ結構
And then I think the last thing is that universities as well as kind of companies less on protecting their IP and really trying to move as fast as possible. Because if you think about it, innovation is about
あれはびっくりした。あれはびっくりした。もう本当にびっくりした。
kind of picking rules and figuring out how to do the next step.
よかったね。びっくりしました。
Running and iterating fast. And if we run and iterate fast, then the success will be there and it kind of leaders don't matter that much. And I think this is important from the point of university letting the research input in the public domain and really benefit the environments in which the university's professors operate, as well as in terms of companies sharing the information and flowing with each other. So there is, for example, a lot of different seminars, people from one company visiting the other company, sharing quite openly actually what they are doing, writing academic papers, again talking about their latest solutions. So that we are all up to date in the system in terms of making the most innovation and the most progress in the short amount of time. Because I think the question is not can we innovate, but the question is, or can we invent something? But the question about innovation is, can we be the first ones to do something? So it's as much about the speed as it is about the success.
取材に応じて村前にいてびっくりだね、本当に。びっくりした。虎のもんね、すごいわ、本当に。タイガーゲーツ。
is really important
왜
that there
상상이
will
그렇게
be a strong
문자
mandate.
긴
One of the challenges
이거
we are
위해서
facing at the
쓰여요.
moment is still the migration crisis. And also the priority of the Austrian
오래전부터
presidency
강화인 게.
is security
민야
and fight
기니까.
against illegal migration. So we had a good discussion today on all these topics, and of course there are different opinions on this. But in general, we are always on the same line. We want to have a solution for the European Union and for Europe. Safe external borders and legal migration, because Europe will need it in the end. But people still have in front of their eyes the migration flood in 2015, and therefore it is really important to have a good solution, and a solution which will be implemented in all the countries of the European Union to have a resilient European asylum system.
야, 제이콥 교과서 쓰여. 교토가なくなったね。今 J の出た。J の世界。
Migration is currently one of the key issues of European citizens, and my view is that it will remain so, especially because migration is here to stay, and it will probably increase in numbers and complexity because of the political consequences of wars, the terrorism, but also because of the climate change.
J さんの影で
I
す。
think, in my view, migration is needed in Europe. I think it's something that we can benefit from, and I think that we need to change the
ああ、い
narrative.
たさ、聞いときねさ、おめえさ、こう、ああ、そうそう、見ね、びっくりしたさ。
Of Europe
びっくり
says
した、
that
もう、
migration
ベ
is
ン
something that we
ベンホール
need
と
to
も捜査受けた
in
よ。
order
知ってる
to
から、もう知ってましたよ。
and grow our economic
見たことある。
development, the quality of life.
じゃあ、福田代表さんも捜査受けたよさ。
Also go back
や
to
め
the
んで。
European
核兵弁護のため
values
に、ちょっと、
and human values
捜査協力したい。
that are, I think, the foundation
黙らぬが言ったよ
of
さ。
Europe, so that together we can
おいにみじゅん
change,
長
as
さ
I
んと
said,
ね、お
the
さい長さん
narrative
とあの関係
and
はね、
help these people, but
もう知って
also
ましたよ、
help
スマイル。
ourselves
海
grow
外
and
で。びっ
develop.
くりしたな。よっかもたでした。本当にね。要は。
Turkey belongs to European family, you know. There is no way that Turkey can distance itself from the realities of Europe. Today, of course, at the Trilateral Commission, we are going to discuss three scenarios: confrontation, cooperation, and membership of Turkey to the EU. In these three scenarios, of course, there are different outcomes. But I would say that confrontation between Turkey and the EU is a complete lose-lose scenario. And if it is
まだクレジット。
instead of
お前ら。
Turkey to the EU,
あ
it
い
will
つ
be
な
some
の。
sort of limited cooperation, and
ここに
it
決め
will
てんの。
be
笑い。
a scenario in which both Turkey and the EU will not be able to enjoy the full potential.
逆にして。
In economics, we say, you know, this is not cost effective at all. But when it comes to EU membership, I would say that this will mean full use of potential of Turkey and the EU together. This means a stronger, stable, respected, fully democratic Turkey, but this also means in the world scene a global actor of EU, peace-bringing EU, welfare-creating EU, employment-creating EU. So I would say that in this case, membership case, the outcome would be win-win-win. So win for Turkey, win for the EU, but also win for beyond.
楽。まあ、
You will have to define what you mean by Europe and the European Union having its own army. I do not think Europe needs its own army for what I would qualify as the classical Article 5 NATO scenario. In other words, in a conflict with Russia. But Europe should definitely, the European Union should definitely develop the possibility to project hard power without the United States of America. I can imagine a scenario in northern Africa where you have a combination of terrorism, climate change, migration. It's an ungoverned part of Africa, largely. Where Boko Haram meets Al-Qaeda, where Al-Qaeda meets Daesh.
そう
In other words,
これ
it's not
これ
impossible.
何を言った
Look
あ
at
今
the French and what they did.
そうこれ何を言ったよ
You would need to intervene militarily, and then the European Union would be on its own.
はいも
Second
う
scenario, virtual but not impossible, when in the Balkans the demons of the past would
びっくり
raise
した本当に 何を言ったんやそれ
repeat the situation like we had in the 90s of the previous century, where finally Bill Clinton and the United States of America had to come in to stabilize the situation. I could think about the need for border protection, external border protection, with military means. You're a bit on the border here between the military and the military police, the gendarmerie in French. In other words, if that is meant by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel with the European army, I can follow them. What we should not forget, by the way, is when you talk about European military intervention, that's why I like European army not much, is that there will always be national parliaments who will decide if those soldiers will be sent into harm's way. So they will not, I hope, talk about a European Parliament which decides this goes to the heart of the sovereignty of nations, and those nations will want to decide themselves. I see the way out, as presented by President Macron of France, the European Intervention Initiative, where you can build coalitions of the willing outside the EU institutions. You can build coalitions of the willing, which you will always need for such kind of military operations. Advantage of a coalition of the willing is that after Brexit, you can keep Great Britain on board, because they will not anymore be a member of the European Union. At the same time, PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, should of course continue. Important project, but rather bureaucratic and rather cumbersome. So that would be my answer to the question: does Europe need its own army? Developments in these last few years are showing us that the strength of the EU relative to individual countries is not constant over time. I believe we can say that the EU is strongest towards countries when a country wishes to accede to the European Union or to the Eurozone. It tends to follow the suggestions and the prescriptions of the EU as much as possible to make progress. And that is the moment when the magnet effect of European integration is really great, and by the way has used countries in the past, if we think of the Balkans, for example, also to establishing better relations among each other in order to qualify for membership of the EU. Then the problem is that sometimes
急に顔出してさびっくりした
EU
急に
is
顔出してさ
not
俺が
so strong in terms of leading them to respect its own rules as pro-Europeans would like
じゃあ
to
下
see.
がいいかもんな
And we can even see in recent
バー
years,
ニーが
for
分裂して
example,
分裂
a greater leniency
態
in
度
terms of allowing infringements of the Stability and Growth Pact. But then the most recent experience is how difficult it is for a country to leave the European Union if it so decides. And the monumental example of Brexit shows us that vis-à-vis a member state which wants to leave the European Union still has wide
何
to get its act together. And this, in my view, should be also kept in mind by countries here and there where governments play with the idea of perhaps leaving one day the EU or the Eurozone. They better keep in mind that it is tremendously difficult. If it has been, it is proving to be so difficult for a country of the standing, the experience, the administration of the quality of the UK. I don't want to imagine other specific examples of countries where the politicians sometimes say, let's get rid of the EU. Not only I have no idea where those countries would end up, but also they would suffer very, very much in the process.
Does the European Union need its own army? Well, here's what I think. The vision of a European army is actually a useful vision because it is good to know what the long-term goal might be. But is the European army something we can put together right now? No. And why not? First and foremost, because the European Union does not even have the mechanism to come up with clear political decisions and to speak with one voice in crisis. So the first step which we in the European Union need to take together is to change our decision-making process. We need to go from consensus
やっぱり
to
ね
qualified majority voting. We need to learn that all of us, whether we are 27 or 28, will only be listened to, will only be respected, and can only be a military actor in the world if we speak with one voice. And that requires majority voting. So that's step number one. And the next steps are capabilities, and we will need to work on that also. And then we can think
あ、安全はそうですね。俺の子供から見えば、まだよ
of a
な。
European army.
大変な。
When one thinks about the 2015 migration crisis, it is true that we have gone a long way as a European continent. And we've gone a long way because in 2015 we were hit with a massive crisis. Hundreds of thousands of migrants coming to Europe's shores. And that is not the case anymore. It is true that the overall numbers have decreased. But is that enough? Is it enough to just look at the overall numbers? Or should one also focus on what's happening within each EU? And I say that because there are certain EU countries, such as Greece, such as Italy, such as Spain, which have taken far greater hits than others when it comes to migration.
笑いもじゃない。
And yes,
笑いもじゃない。
numbers go down, but problems do
ごめんね、瀬戸ちゃんまでして
persist
さ。
in
なんか瀬戸
countries
ちゃん
like
み
the
たい
ones
な
I just mentioned.
口調になってこんなじゃん本
The
人
question
さ
one
な
needs
ん
to
か
ask is, has Europe done enough in order to alleviate the effects of the crisis throughout the entire EU 20?
は
Done enough in order to share burdens?
あはい
And I say that particularly because when one looks at the figures regarding relocation of refugees across Europe, then one will realize that not enough has been done in that direction. And so one is led to the question, what kind of Europe do we want? Do we want a Europe where we all share the benefits of Europe? Or do we also want a Europe where the countries also share burdens?
ね見てるからねわかったレティングおまけやったそうびっくりやったおまけやったそうおまけですよあびっくりしたそうおまけすごいねこそ 人ねローマ憲法じゃさ永住
So
どう
I
かし
would like that to be
た
the main theme for our
そう
conversation,
じゃね
and I can simply leave it with that and ask you. So what does it take, and what can we do?
Well,
マリーン
I should tell
一
you
つ聞きたいね
first
証拠は
what
出せそっちか
I
違うやろ他に
about
おしゃれムスリムの件か
So
お前ら
my wife and I have
いやー貴重的
city to
テルマさんってもみたいにテルマさん言ったら無理ですあ
and
ムスリム教会代表して言ってあ無理だって言って
250,000 people over the course of that
ねそうでしょ
in Australia, New Zealand, and throughout the US and Canada. Some in Europe, mostly in the UK and Scandinavian countries, coming back here in March and April to
こういうのいいねいい山期間
the south and the east.
バグ
When I speak to audiences, I always watch people one by one because I never speak to the crowd. And I always listen to the entire audience because what I'm trying to manage when I'm speaking is to put everybody in the same place so that there's dead silence. Because if there's dead silence, that means that everybody's concentrating on the same thing and that everybody has come to a collective agreement that that thing is of substantive importance. And the most reliable
あ
means
行くよ
of
さすが JO
silencing an audience of 2,500 people, regardless of where that is around the world,
同じで
is to make a strong case for the relationship between
ね使い方的には結構
meaning and responsibility.
じゃ
And the case for suffering, I think, is quite obvious because one of the things that I point out to my listeners is that life has a tragic element. We all are perfectly aware of that. And that we're subject to that as fragile and finite creatures. And that tragic element is amplified by the human proclivity for malevolence at a psychological level and at a social level. And that's the reality that we find ourselves confronted with eternally in some sense. And that the proper antidote to that is not the pursuit of happiness. And it's not even the existence of the individual rights that are
代行してました
part of the substructure of democratic society, but the
Very good.
willingness to accept voluntary responsibility for those preconditions and then working to rectify them. And the corollary of that is that it's almost inevitably the case that people find the meaning that sustains themselves through suffering and that enables them to be motivated sufficiently to constrain their own malevolence is to be found in the adoption of responsibility.
おお負けた
And it's
あやばい
surprising
オスカーが
that a message that
あやばいよ
has that much
したら
weight, let's say, and that little
やばいオ
frivolity,
スカーやばいな
no frivolity,
Oh, yeah.
let's say, in that.
お前言ったんやお前無理やって言ったんや
Silence is peace.
ハラミ系もイスラム人じゃん
Can democracy survive? Well, first of all, if you ask
アホや本当
a
に
person in a democratic society whether they would
や
like
っ
it to
ぱり
survive,
来てたやん
the resounding answer to that is going to be yes.
そうや
The people who are working to
Oh, yeah,
undermine it are
and,
a tiny radical fringe on
oh, yeah,
both ends of the
yeah.
political distribution, let's say, with a disproportionate amount of exposure and power.
じゃ
And the people in the middle are lost in some sense
Yeah.
without a uniting narrative.
あと思ったや
And
ん
a huge part of the narrative that has united democratic countries since their foundation isn't the doctrine of rights. And it's not the doctrine of individual happiness. It's the doctrine
ハ
that
ー
the
ピーって
individual
これ
is the
アベノ
sovereign
チャージブリアン政
foundation
治がなんでプリキュアなんだよさ
of the polity
こんなよ
and
間違いこの辺に
of the
ってなん
cosmos
か
itself, which is something that I happen to believe, given
Why
the
did I come
important
here?
role that consciousness plays in existence itself,
水切っていって
and that
やばいな水だ
useful
と
and
ね
necessary to call to
こ
people
れかこいつ
to
は
remind them of their
やばいシグマか今ね
responsibility as
あ
sovereign
あ
individuals
もう知ってたよな
And so
あ
I'm encouraging
信玄ださあもう知ったよな
to
どうなった じゃんけさ
to develop a vision for their life, to adopt full responsibility for themselves in a manner, and not in a manner that pertains specifically to their narrow self-interest or happiness, but to something that's much broader in scope. To think that each person should take on the voluntary requirement to take care of themselves, but also their future self, because each of us is a collective that stretches across time, and whatever you do impulsively in the present merely means to sacrifice yourself in the future.
英語のさっき T と D だこれがいいのこれいいのただ前に言ったらヌーに
And
言っ
you
た
want
ら
to
ね
take on a responsibility for
ただ
yourself
ねハンドル
and your future
ハンドル
self in a way that's of maximal benefit to your
気づか
family,
なかった
if you can manage that, and then perhaps if there's something
気づ
left
かなか
over
った
in terms of your capability, then you can do both of those things in a way that
気づかなかった
maximally supports and
気
serves
づ
the
かなかった
community. And for
気
many
づかな
young
かった
people,
エレジオン
that's
た
something
だの
they
エレジオ
never
ンじゃ
heard.
ねえよさ
Is that we made a very bad case.
新美容薬化現象
We
とい
made a
う
very
俺
bad
が説明
case,
した通り
all of us, I would say.
あれは斉藤はじさんご説明したさあそれはね山王大学と東京学芸大学の
Each
近く
person has that
Sure.
sovereign
あれやっていい
responsibility.
な
And that
今な
if they
孫
adopt
で
it,
すねアンジェリー
that
ナ
actually
孫で
constitutes
すね
something of singular importance.
マーシェリン孫です
And that's an old religious
What
idea
the- you know,
in
Mao.
some sense.
You know,
That each
no?
person has
息子だ
a soul, let's say, that
まあどういうことや
is somehow a center of reality itself,
みたいね
and that needs to be manifested in life itself. And that if it isn't
なんで宮坂
manifested,
関係
then
者責
something
任転嫁
of
するのも
tremendous
怒ってん
value
の
is
やめろって言ったら
not brought
右
forward.
翼なんて一番怖いってあいつら危ないって言ったらまあ危ないって言ったら
End of the case.
まああいつら危ないあー
To the degree that that's not
Oi,
brought
oi,
forward,
oi,
then something
oi,
healthy
oi, oi,
needs
oi,
to take its place.
いや痛いね本当に
People
あ
understand this sort of thing a lot more
い
clearly
つ
than
ら
you
怖い
might
と
think,
立川の連中びっくりした
as if they could understand.
ガッサク子供
And then it
子供
gives them a series of purposes
ガッ
that
サク子供やった
straightens out their life. And
これ
so my sense is
ブロックシャーさん
the way that you revivify democracy is by remembering its fundamental
やっ
insistence
ぱ
that
りあ
the
ー
individual is at the cornerstone of the state, and that everything you can possibly do to fortify the individual
なんか言ってんのさ
simultaneously.
人たち一斉に
The individual is the
Oi,
eyes of the
Ark
state. Is that
やるわけねえやろ西村そう
the living
こうしたい
individual
と
is
荒
the
さいよ
eyes
さ荒さいじゃんよびっくりしたさ
The living individual revivifies the state,
これ言ったよ
and to the degree that we forget our
あんたらやったらさあんたら
sovereignty of the individual, right? The divine sovereignty of the individual, for that matter.
上がやってた
Then we undermine the foundation on
Okay.
which democracy is based.
上
And
田選
then
手
people
がやっ
look
て
for
る
alternatives. They
あ
search
上田選手の
meaning
やってるかこれ
elsewhere.
そういう
Extremist movements
おかしい
of
な
one
や
form
め
or
これや
another,
やってる
or
人
they
だ
collapse into a kind of nihilism that's completely
知らない
counterproductive.
じゃね今ねもう離婚しようって検討者が
Well, so
さ
that's been my experience.
たまつらんか誰のニュースでさもうびっくりした岸も高いるじゃんさみんな見るやん顔見てさ
now it is the end of the Chatham meeting, which was a great meeting. We have had excellent discussions. We have learned a lot, and we have thought a lot. And now I hope to see you in Paris next June.
大学この祭りから学生でエンドワイドね
All of us, we shall be there. So
声
please do
似
come
て
to
ない
Paris.
調べたらみんな YouTube で似てたはあなんか似てたびっくりした小松理香さんが勘違いでもなびっくりした日程固まるわかるこれもう
So this morning we had a session on future mobility, and we actually discussed what does it mean for the auto industry and what does it mean
知ってるじゃん本当に
If
大
you
塚
look
や
at
っぱりな
the auto industry,
急
there has
な
never been as much
トライメ
change
と
as
大
there
津やったわ
is today.
け昨
On
日
technology
やっぱ
side,
こいつは共謀してたもん
connectivity, electrification, autonomous
これ
driving,
ね辰巳君やね草津はもう大丈夫やった
sharing, more
辰巳君
urbanization.
無理だったさあやっぱりだった
Also on the
難
regulation
しかった
side, where it's about emission
どういうことやって言っ
control
た
standards, and also
誰が許可しちゃうだから俺は
managing congestions.
あ上等宮内庁に文句言ってんあんたら日本政府がやったのかってさやっとったよ俺がま来たよ
How will
Dang.
actually the traffic evolve if you have more AVs and
あんたらがやったんじゃないさ
AVs? What would be levers to actually work on getting a mitigation on traffic and basically how to deal with heightened traffic from autonomous vehicles. What would be the impact of actually sharing more cars, smaller or maybe bus-based vehicles, and actually how would you deal with community-based pricing? How would you actually work as a city to make the whole mobility work and in the end get to a better transportation for the whole?
大体今回この前と今回ね7分とね聞かないよ問題だ問題はよ言えよお前じゃ誰の許可で行った日本政府命令かけそのお前この間上に行ったよ上にかけやったよさ上に行ったよもう警察庁やつなのさあとにかけてもないよ上に行った黙りなしなのに上にパスポート事件の時に俺さすがに知らんけど長島職員に文句言ったらさ電話したらあんた態度悪いぞ本当に言うぞこれ上にさ言っとんだよどんなに好きだよやっぱりね困ってもだあんまり使いやんねあんまりせんねうわった誰やと思った売ってられると思ったすごい興奮びっくりしたなねそれはじゃあ自立してやるんじゃんその辰巳くんかやっぱりディープステートやっぱりじゃあ東京だったもうどういうね本当にマスロビーで見るじゃん本当にもし本当に神田正輝さんも出て本当びっくりした本当に神田正輝君何出てびっくりした本当にびっくりした本当に総称がその指揮してる要は逆にその陰でその活動し始めたよな分散体制やってやっぱり一部の会社員揉めてるからやっぱ揉めてるからやっぱ外務省の会社員結構多いって言われてさ多いんやんやっぱりねやっぱり自民党も不正選挙調査してるやっぱり調査してバカ小泉進次郎のあの票が12万票おかしいやろだから20万票いくって言ったら比例合わせて比例加算されるってああどういうことだと思ったらびっくりしたやっぱり辻やっぱりあいつ来たくせたらさ木下の言った通りですわやっぱり花がいい長野やった
Strategic mission for Europe has to care on the globalized world. That means to stabilize our neighborship.
やっぱり大きくなりたいし警察もこういうのそうやっぱり出られないあいつら日本政府やっぱ税金で食ってたのもおかしいなと思ったんだけどさあえて
our European values as attractive as possible in the global competition. Which order is the better one?
びっくりした。小林さんの今は逆にさ、見えに来たんじゃないですか。見えに来たんやん。富田浩生さんの要請。来たんやん。ガタが分裂してたわけや。
Some people wonder why best practices in
そうだよ。ゆかさんもさ、
spread
天候
faster
組やったら今や
amongst
天
the
候組やったら。
democracies. When you see,
だって
for
7分
example,
元から
New
日本に
Zealand
来てい
has
る。
solved the problem of public finance, why doesn't everybody copy it? Why doesn't everybody copy the way that the South Koreans teach their kids mathematics? Why doesn't everybody copy the way the Swiss decentralize their
だって
politics?
最終的には光教科の指導を受けて、多分演技下手くそだ。そう、俺平さんだよさ。
Looking at what
光
is
教科
best
めっちゃ
practice.
すごい
I
ですね
live in the
さ。
United States, though I grew up in the United Kingdom.
無事にさ、
One hardly ever hears a
世界最
reference
初になっ
to
てびっくり
other
やな。
countries' systems
いや、
in the
青
US
に入ったのそう、ちょっとやっぱりな。
healthcare,
青のブルース
except
にやっぱりな、こ
when
の
somebody is
マウス
making
パ
a
ル
completely caricatured analysis of the way, say, Canada does things.
大
So
塚
I think part
大
of
塚
what we
近尾
need
さん
to
がい
do
たね。
is stress the need to look at best practice so that politicians and voters become more aware that there are solutions to most of the public policy problems. We just haven't tried them in many countries.
クエンか。
On the other hand, I think there's one other side to this that one shouldn't forget. Sometimes you'll meet people who'll tell you, well, the Scandinavians have worked everything out, and Sweden or Finland or Denmark has come up with the perfect solution to policy problems. That's often an argument people make on the left in the United States. But I don't think the solutions that the Swedes came up with in recent decades necessarily work in a country as large and diverse as the United States. So let's look at best practice. Let's understand which systems deliver the best results. But let's not pretend that one size is going to fit all. Part of the reason for the success of Western civilization, which is where democracy began, was the diversity of systems and the competition between them.
やっぱ7分もフォローしてんかいな。じいちゃんのこれね、バーリンのサイト本物でした。気づかんかったら皆さん本人。
I recently read that information is now the world's most consequential and contested geopolitical resource. I think that's right. Global internet penetration has revolutionized the information domain. And information operations, which aren't new, are dramatically expanding in scale and scope. This is a new challenge for media organizations, which are already facing a business model crisis and declining trust.
なんか携帯
Meanwhile,
に
AI
なんか
advances
なんかあ
converge
ったね。
strategic
そう。
advantage to those with access to
こ
lots
れ
of
かな
data.
と思った。
This has implications for privacy, but also for the
やっぱりね、
information advantage
アメリ
that
カ海兵
democracies
隊とかやっ
traditionally
ぱ
enjoy.
報告したんやけど、こういう低い。まあ、元から将軍だったりさ、戦場の艦艇からね、軍人だったんやさ。
Well, does diplomacy, European diplomacy exist?
そうだ、ア
It's
メリカ
not
軍人はね、アメリカ
an
人
easy
だ
question,
ったら、
and the answer
捜
is
査協力してるよ。あだよ。
yes or no.
それが証拠にね、ほんま FBI 捜査が来たからね
Institutional
さ。
sense, that is, Mrs. Mogherini today exists. She travels, she can deliver some messages for Europe, but I would say certainly not on the most fundamental issues of foreign policy, because the members of the European Union are, many of them, very old nation states. They have their own policy, defense,
ああ、そうや、俺。
security apparatus, and so forth and so on.
俺よりか学歴俺緊張してまうわ、本人来たら。
The French
ビビるわ。
diplomacy
ビビるってよ。
has to be second to the European diplomacy, and the same with the UK, as long as the UK is in the EU or the German diplomacy, and I could continue the list. So, in my judgment, the best merit of the EU
クリン
diplomacy
ゲールは初めて。
is first to perhaps reduce as much as possible the differences between the various diplomacies of the member states.
誰とね、したトマスは。ああ、映画さ、好きして。
And also, I think the EU diplomacy can deal with some relatively secondary issues, as, for instance, I'm thinking of the Timor case in Indonesia, that is issues which are not at the forefront of national diplomacies, but which nevertheless can have some importance. So, to conclude, I would say that the real European diplomacy will exist only the day when the Europeans have a clear understanding
あとね向こうも訴えるけどさ詐欺だって訴えられるけど冒涜しちゃったで
the identity of the European Union still to be built, because diplomacy, like defense, has to do with the protecting the identity of a political unit. And I think we have not yet reached the stage when we are able to answer this question: what is our identity, and what is it exactly that we want to protect?
欧州はさあ冒涜解将軍のお孫さんが冒涜解将軍ヒーローとかさマッカーサーとゴゴンぶつかったわけですよ。
They're certainly similar in one respect that Thucydides wrote about brilliantly in his book on the Peloponnesian War. That when a rising power, as Thucydides wrote about Athens, threatens to displace a ruling power like Sparta, or in the current situation, a rising China threatens to displace a ruling US, alarm bells should sound, grave danger ahead, a significant likelihood of war, real bloody war.
なんか実感あったプライドさ
I think China's rise will change the international configuration from the unipolar to a bipolar, and also possibly make the world order and different from before. But it doesn't mean that the China's rise is the only factor to change the current international order. And actually, the Chinese policy is more challenging than China's rise to the current international order. Because China's policy try to maintain the order, the reason is very obvious. China benefits from the present order, and meanwhile, the Trump administration believe, and China benefits more from the current order than the United States. That's why they want to change the order, and based on the ideology of anti-establishment. So from my understanding, if we're talking about one ideology and challenging the current international order or the liberalist order, is the anti-establishmentism in the US and the populism in the Euro.
なんか長くなんかアホかって言ったら最後月
I think in economic terms, it's already shaping up to be the Chinese century. By 2014, according to the IMF, China was the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity, and in other respects, China is already the world's largest manufacturer, the world's largest exporter, the world's largest market for a great many important commodities such as vehicles. The question is whether that economic power translates into political power and strategic power, because I think most people would agree, probably even in Beijing, that America remains the world's dominant political power. And the question is, will that economic mismatch between economic power and strategic power change, and China will become the dominant power, not just economically, but politically? It's too soon to tell that, however, on that, because there are a lot of different variables. Will there be a direct conflict between China and the US, for example, over dominance of the Pacific? Will China perhaps be constrained by other things? Maybe there'll be internal disruption to China's politics if it cannot manage to, for example, maintain current political stability. That could disrupt China's political rise. And finally, there's the question of the rest of the world, because between them, China and the US are not the whole world economy. Other major powers will have a say in this. And at the moment, it looks like most of the other major powers of the world, Japan, the European
アメリ
Union
カの証言者
are closer to the United States than to China. So there's a question whether China, even as the world's largest economy, can
ロ
become
マ系
the
だ
dominant political
完
power
全にヨー
without
ロッパ系
allies.
だほんとびっくりしたね
I think economic growth, the success or failure of it will be determined by the degree to which individual countries and regions can supply jobs for the great emerging middle classes of these countries, formerly poor countries. I think what we're likely to see in the 21st century is many, many people who are either liberated from hard labor or for whom there is too little hard labor to provide jobs. And what will these people do? How will they be employed? And I think that will be a major factor contributing forward. Also, even though the world population is declining, we're still in an era of massive male youth bulges in about 20 or 30 countries. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to provide jobs for people, whether it's in China, in Yemen, it's in Ethiopia, or wherever.
はいだ英語っぽいから絡みって言ってなんかめんたいね日本にわからんからねそう知ってた
The main question of my talk is if robotics and artificial intelligence and the upcoming industrial revolution are a threat or an opportunity for the world and for manufacturing countries and also for developing countries. And the answer is still unknown. But what is sure now is that we have to invest in the main assets that are characterizing the industrial revolution, the digital transformation, competences, infrastructures, data centers, and all the tools that are fundamental and are considered enabling technologies for the future digital transformation. I also presented the differences between the US, Europe, and China, how they are integrating artificial intelligence in different knowledge and competences and scientific results. For example, in the US, they are investing very much in developing artificial intelligence for humanities. While in China, they are investing in developing artificial intelligence for agricultural application, for producing food, for example. So globalization has obtained some results in terms of being socially connected, but in terms of geopolitics, we still see many differences also in how the digital transformation is implemented in the society. Then I spoke about robotics and how the journey of robotics is coming into us, because robotics was developed for manufacturing countries, for industrial production, and robots are in manufacturing plants. But in recent years, what we have seen is the development of service robotics, which is intended to support services and they offer services in terms of medical robotics, educational robotics. And now what is happening is that robotics is coming into our houses by producing some consumer products and also producing changes in the society in some of supporting autonomous drive or different products that are revolutionizing business and revolutionizing our lives.
俺が反応したことあっただからみんなですね彼めっちゃ綺麗じゃないかさちょっとセンス
We do have a very serious problem of people left behind. The global agenda talks about eradicating hunger, having every child in primary and secondary education. We're often trying to achieve these things. And that means not just a few people left behind, it means literally hundreds of millions of people
missing out. Take education. More than 250 million children, adolescents and youth not in school as we speak. How can those children and youth of the future really contribute to a knowledge economy if denied the most basic access to education? So it is time for the international community to get a grip of the reality of what is happening. If we want a world that's well fed, where people don't live in extreme poverty, where education is a right, not a privilege, we have a lot to do. International development assistance is important, critical for the lowest income countries. For other countries to be prioritising their budget so that their growth is inclusive and sustainable is critical. There are solutions. What's needed is the political will to activate and implement those solutions.
There are more than 70 million people in the world that are forcibly displaced from their homes, either as refugees crossing borders or displaced in their own country because of war, violence, discrimination, persecution, bad governance. Why is that? The world has become a difficult place where to make peace. We have become unable to make peace and to build peace. So that's the first thing that we need to look at if we want to reduce this global refugee crisis. Meanwhile, what is very important to remember is that 85% of those 70 million people are not in the rich world. They are in poor countries or middle-income countries. So the effort, and the new effort, not just humanitarian, but medium, long-term effort, founded on sound development, both for refugees and for host communities, has to focus on those countries. We have now a global compact on refugees. We will have the first ever global refugee forum in December this year in Geneva. These are opportunity to rally broader coalitions of actors, not just states and the United Nations, but also the private sector, the business community, civil society, academia, to forge new ways to respond to the global refugee crisis and to finally address strategically its root causes.
The question that you're raising, will Syria find a long-lasting peace? Well, the Syrian people deserve a long-lasting peace. Think about it. They've been 8 years now in a horrible conflict which became from local, regional, and frankly international. So the answer is it must be yes. Now, how to do it is where the challenge is coming. And the only way to do it is actually to end the military conflict, because there is no solution. I mean, it's not just a word, it's the truth. There will never be just a military solution. And include everyone. New constitution, elections under the UN supervision. That would be a way to include them.
Well, I'm delighted to be able tonight to address the members of the trilaterals and their guests. And I think my focus will be tonight on three things. One is, multilateralism has been the bread and butter of many of us, certainly at the IMF, and we believe that it has been critical in order to address many of the potential disorders of the world. Multilateralism is under threat at the moment, and I think that we have to make every effort to rejuvenate it, adapt it, and make sure that it continues to help govern, particularly the economic developments around the world. That's message number one. My second message will have to do with the much more longer-term consequences of short-term policies and mechanisms, and that is really the consequences of climate change. I believe that many of the issues that we're debating at the moment will mean absolutely nothing in 20 years' time if we have not acted now in order to make sure that the planet remains something for our children and grandchildren. And my third message, which will not surprise any of those who know me or my friends, will have to do with inequality, and in particular the inequality that women have to suffer and have had to suffer for a long time. And while inequality as such is a major disruption, I believe that by addressing women's situation and the inequality that they face, it will help quite a way in reducing inequalities. So we'll try to do that tonight.
We're living through an era of rapid and disruptive change. That's across the board, economy, society, and what we're seeing is that nowhere is that disruption more evident than the trends associated with climate change. We're all familiar with the extreme events, the temperature rises, and the inexorable change that we're seeing to the planet's ecology as a result of climate change. But a major part of that discussion is how does energy transition, decarbonization of our energy system, which accounts for about 2/3 of carbon emissions, how will that impact climate change, and can we enter an energy transition era rapidly enough to mitigate carbon that will take us to a safe future? This is already happening. Renewable energy today is cost competitive on the grid. In a few years, renewable energy has reached 33% of capacity of global power generation. It's the fastest growing segment, and costs are decreasing rapidly. So what we're going to see is a rapid movement towards energy transition that's also going to be disruptive for the business models of today. It's going to imply new geostrategic relationships among countries as countries move away from resource-dependent fossil fuel-based systems into clean energy systems, and the resource is going to become technology, and technology innovation is going to decide the winners and losers in this race.
そんなにちょっとだけ言ってないですよ。ちょっと宣伝してっていうかこの最適やな。
The low carbon economy should come because to avoid the climate change, serious let's say effort is necessary. Many of the governments are trying the new technologies, new regulations, new rules to move to that direction. But the IEA, International Energy Agency, assessed the current effort is not enough. We need much more efforts to introduce new technologies about renewables or carbon-related technologies, efficiency in a difficult sector, in the industry, and new regulations. So we need really double or triple our efforts to make it happen. One of the areas which IEA focused on is hydrogen. Hydrogen can be used to store the electricity generated by wind or solar, which is very volatile, and storage is a key element. So battery may not necessarily be enough, so hydrogen can be used. And also hydrogen can be used for steel, cement, some of the industries where the decarbonization is very difficult. So that's another area. The third one will be the hydrogen could be the new transformation for the sectors of the oil or gas producing country. If they can remove carbon dioxide from oil or gas or coal, then these hydrocarbon change into the very friendly, climate-friendly resources. So this may prevent the hydrocarbon as a stranded asset. So maybe the hydrogen is one of the key areas. We need lots of infrastructure building, technologies are necessary, but hydrogen may give us a good chance to achieve the sustainable future.
The challenge of dealing with the time they will appeal to anger, they'll appeal to fear, they'll appeal to hatred, and they will try and stop people thinking. They'll try and get people so enraged that they switch off their critical faculty. That means that for those of us who are trying to challenge these narratives on a daily basis, it's a much more complex challenge than just presenting the facts. You have to have the ability to tell the story, and you have to find an emotion to appeal to, which will actually get people to think. Now, fortunately, there is a model of story which works. If you think of the detective story, that's a story where you're putting together evidence and you're telling people this is what happened, this is why it happened, and it appeals to a different sort of emotion. It appeals to curiosity. It appeals to problem solving, and so a lot of the challenge of dealing with disinformation is presenting the story of how the disinformation was created, how was the trick done, and you can lead people on the story and you can show them this person is telling you that here is a video of somebody attacking a voter at a polling station yesterday, but actually look, this video showed up on CNN 4 years ago in a different context. You would share that voyage of discovery with the person you're talking with, and then they will realize how the trick was done. It will also sensitize them that the next time around, they'll be looking for that same trick. If you teach people very simple skills like searching for a photo online or searching for a video online, you can actually make them proof against that kind of reused content and repackaged content, not just today, but every time this kind of thing comes up. And so really dealing with disinformation, you have to have the facts, but you have to teach the skills as well. You have to give people the ability to solve the problems for themselves, because then you'll be appealing to their curiosity, you'll be appealing to their problem-solving senses, and you'll be appealing to their sense of pride in actually experiencing the story in the first place. And those encourage will then counter the anger and the fear and the hatred that disinformation
何を言ったんよさあ、さあ何を言ったって言った。まさかお前ら受験ねお前ら何さんたちこれのタッキー大変。
Cities are one of the greatest innovations of all times, and what's interesting right now is that urbanization is, alongside with